running a program right this minute with a clip of her. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the CCA Living Room. My name's Jason Silverman. My favorite line in the Constitution, which is a beautiful document, is the phrase, a more perfect union. And we have, just in the last couple of months, lost two true American heroes who made that phrase come true. We lost John Lewis a few months ago, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who another great, someone who made the nation a stronger, better, more equitable place, has passed, as you all know. Ruth was also kind of an honorary Santa Fean. We were very grateful to have her with us during our time, and we're going to play a short clip just to honor her memory.
What do you think is the biggest threat to our democracy?
A public that doesn't care about preserving the rights we have. You know that great speech on liberty by Judge Learned Hand? And he says that he said, if the fire dies in the hearts of people, there's no constitution and no judge that can restore it. So my faith is in the spirit of liberty.
Okay.
lost Jim.
We have it's a bittersweet. It's going to turn into a bittersweet program tonight, but we're gonna muscle on because a lot of amazing things to talk about tonight. I want to say that we've decided to make all of our living room programs free going forward. Not all of them, but most of them. The pandemic has taken its toll on a lot of members of our community, and we believe arts and culture is an incredible way to raise people's spirits. We can think more deeply, etc. Inspiration, context, meaning in a time of deep transition. And so please join us, spread the word about all of our wonderful living room programs. You can find out more at ccasantafe.org. If you would like to support what we're doing, there is an easy way to do that. We have an offer. You'll see in the right there a donate button. You can click on that. If you click on it, it's going to open a separate window. You don't have to deal with it now. You can deal with it after the program. Deal with it. You can make a donation after the program and support the CCA and CCA Living Room program. We'd love to have you do that. Make a donation for the $12 you might have spent, or treat a few other people to living room programming. If you're not in Santa Fe, or if you have other favorite cultural institutions, support whoever you can in the arts and cultural world. We need you now. You need us. We all need each other. And the healing and rebuilding that will happen after this moment is substantial. So we want to keep as many of these wonderful organizations in Santa Fe and everywhere going. So support your arts and cultural organizations. I am really thrilled to be able to introduce my colleague, Laura Carpenter, who will introduce our guest tonight and who will moderate. Laura is an esteemed gallerist. She is a creative consultant at the CCA. And has a personal connection with this story. So please welcome Laura.
Hi, I'm Laura Carpenter, and my personal connection is really Jim Kelly, who's going to be on here in a minute. This movie, this documentary, and this event, which is this forgery event in our contemporary times, was an extraordinary thing to have happened. And it's every time I look at it or read about it or think about it, I think, how could it happen? I do think that that is something that we all think about right now as we're looking, sorry about my dogs, as we're looking at the world and our country. It's like, how could all of this happen? How could, in the case of Driven to Abstraction, how could a person, how could a gallery, how could this fraud be perpetrated in our time with all that we know and all the information that we have? And this is an interesting documentary that kind of tells us what's happening all around us that sometimes we don't see. And sometimes we don't see it because we don't look. And I think this is a really interesting story and beautifully told in this movie, which I hope you all have watched. And I think that how we go forward is really beginning to open says to us, open your eyes and look at what's really real. And so I hope you all find this interesting for so many reasons. To start out, I want to introduce Daria Price, who has created this documentary, and let her tell you a little bit. I hope you all have watched it, but tell you a little bit about what her goals were in making it. Daria.
Hi. My goals in making it. Well, I don't think I actually started out with a goal. I found this story was just increasingly crazier and crazier. And I sort of got hooked on it myself. And then the more research I did, the more hooked I got on it. In the process of making it, I ran into so many obstacles that they themselves conquering the obstacles became part of the goal. And the biggest obstacle, I would say, is that the secrecy in the art world, which then extended to the attitude that I often embraced, leaving Jim Kelly aside, he wasn't like that. But, I think that this kind of scandal can only happen when you have systemic lack of transparency and secrecy. And as I was beginning to make the film and finding that even people who had absolutely no reason to be worried legally were still so tainted by the scandal that they could not make up their mind. Would they be in it? Would they not be in it? That sort of became apparent, early on, and it lasted all the way through. So I would say, to me, it ended up not being so shocking that the scandal could go on for 15 years. I bet you there are other ones that do too.
Well, I think there's a little bit of willful not, now that I look back, there's a lot of willful not looking, not paying attention. Again, that not an area we're not going to discuss, but I think that is happening in other places because people want to go along and get along, and it works for them. And I think that's got to change. I think we all have to look at things. How, Jim, did you and Daria meet in getting on this documentary together?
We met at the trial. I testified on the third day of the trial, and once my testimony was over, then I could actually sit in the audience and observe. And I sat in the audience for the next 2 weeks every day. I came every day to support my clients, Domenico and Eleanor DeSole. And as luck would have it, Daria was doing the same thing. She was there covering the trial for her own interests, I believe, because of her background as a documentary filmmaker, and she found this interesting topic, so she was there every day, and so we got to know each other because we were seated together or next to one another at this trial. He and I and many other people, we had correspondents and reporters from all sorts of news organizations. There was Bloomberg News, there was ArtNet News, there was sometimes a Wall Street Journal reporter would show up. We had people from the New York Times, artists would come through during the 2-week period. We have all these different people who would show up. But Daria and I were there every day, and also the court reporter or the court illustrator, court artist was there every day. So that's how I met Daria, was at the trial.
I'm going to step back for a minute and make sure that all of you, everybody who's tuned in, happens to know exactly what happened. Knoedler was the second oldest gallery in the country, very respected, had a tremendous reputation. And suddenly, not suddenly, but strangely suddenly, it became to people's attention that the director there and a principal had been selling, and the gallery had been selling fake paintings by many contemporary artists, which people didn't think could be faked because contemporary art has a much different kind of provenance program. People can follow it very easily. Most of a lot of people have been alive, and people who know where work has been traced. But suddenly, great work, it seemed, came out and was being sold for a lot of money, and it became known that this group of about 40 paintings were not real; they were fake. And a lawsuit ensued. It was settled, so there were never any criminal or even rulings against, but it really had an impact in the art world about what's real, plus the question about pricing. How is anything worth this much money? Jim and Daria's done a documentary on it, and Jim was a participant in this and helped the people take advantage of. Jim, you can tell your part, but he helped this come to a good conclusion for his clients. But the fallout from this has yet to be known, and it'll have an impact for a long time in the contemporary art world. So I just thought I'd step back just in case somebody tuned in that didn't know what was going on or hadn't seen the movie, but you should definitely see Daria's movie, which you can link up to online at CCA. But Jim, do you have any thoughts about how you feel about all of this?
Yeah, I guess just to follow up from what you said in the introduction, the scandal was the fact that this August Gallery, Knoedler, had been selling fake art over a 15-year period. And one of my clients, one of my best clients, actually ended up buying one of those fake paintings. In 2004, they purchased a Mark Rothko painting. And they kept it from 2004 until it became obvious in 2011 that it was more than likely a fake painting. So they had owned it for all those years, assuming it was a Rothko, and they went to great expense to insure this painting. It was framed in a very secure frame that had a shatterproof glass in front of it. Their insurance company wanted it to be attached to the wall so that it would have a detector on it, so that if somebody took it off the wall, then the detector would notice that and the alarms would go off. So they took very good care of this painting, thinking it was a genuine Rothko. So my involvement in this was the fact that my client had bought one of these paintings. And to back up a couple of steps, it was not a painting that I recommended they buy. They, on their own, went to the Knoedler Gallery looking for a painting by Sean Scully. That Knoedler showed Sean Scully's work, and they went by on their own to look at a Sean Scully. And when they went to visit Anne Friedman, whom they've not met before, they went in and she took them into her office, and she then told them, well, I don't have any Sean Scullys, but I'll be happy to look for one for you. If we get some new ones from Sean, I'll let you know. And while they were in her office, there were two other paintings on view. One was the Rothko that ended up buying, and the other one was a small scale Jackson Pollock painting. And Domenico had always liked Rothko. Oddly enough, I had already sold them a Rothko. It was a small scale Rothko. It was from 1973. It was a work on paper mounted to canvas. And the painting that they saw at Knoedler was a 1957 painting, which is from a classic period of Rothko. And it was a very large, much larger painting than their work on paper. And it was an oil on canvas. And those paintings are quite rare and quite expensive and unusual to find. So Mr. DeSole was really interested in this painting. He also liked Pollock, and he also saw this Pollock, and that Pollock was $25 million. Is that what they were told the price was? So he realized that's not what he wanted to spend. So after they had that meeting with Anne, unbeknownst to me, they left Anne's office and they called me on the phone from their cell and said, Jim, we just seen the most beautiful Rothko painting. It's $8.5 million. Saw it with Anne Friedman. Can you please check the price? Tell us if this is a fair price. This is all covered in the film, so I don't want to, reiterate what the film shows, but that's how it got started. So I investigated the price, and the price was fair. It was actually slightly lower than it might have been. It could have been close to 9 or 10 million, but it was 8.5. So I said, yes, this is a good price. So they ended up buying the painting, and that's how this whole thing got started. And it was relatively early on in the Knoedler scandal, the Knoedler selling of these 40-odd paintings. I think this was in 04. They began selling these things in 1998, I believe.
No, 1994, actually. They were
1994.
The Diebenkorns were in like 1994, maybe even 93. Yeah.
So that's sort of the timeline as far as my and my client's involvement in this case. Then the DeSoles realized, again, this is covered in the film, the discovery of the fact that it's probably fake, and we agreed that it was, given the provenance was the same as the other fakes that was being discovered. And so prior to the Desoles, all the other people that determined that they may have had a fake painting from Knoedler, there were about 3 or 4 other prior clients that came to this conclusion earlier. They called Knoedler. Knoedler refused to refund their money, and then they started to threaten lawsuits, and they all settled out of court. They didn't even take this issue to trial. They settled like 50 cents on the dollar, or even less. One of the guys paid $17 million for a painting, and I think he may have gotten $5 million from Knoedler. So he didn't come out whole altogether. And so, but Mr. Desole and Mrs. Desole, they did not want to settle. They felt they were wronged. They wanted to take this to trial and to show the art world what bad actors are in the art world. Not all of us are bad actors, but there are some people that are in the art world that are suspicious. And so they just wanted to take this and make a statement with this. And they went ahead and they took the trial, the only case that came to trial. And then it is shown in the film, but it was settled at trial. Both Knoedler settled, and Michael Hammer settled, who's the owner of Knoedler, and Ann Friedman settled. So we never got a real closing to the case, but it went all the way to trial, and my client got full. They were able to get income fees back. They got their money back for the painting. They got their money back to pay for their attorney's fees, which took 3 years to take this to trial. And they got some sort of punitive damage amount back. I don't know what the settlement was, because it's a private settlement. But so they were pleased in the end that they got restitution.
Daria, do you think? Tell me about what you think the long-term damage done to the art world by this event is. Or do you think there is long-term damage, or do you think people don't care, or do you think it's too insular, or how do you feel about it?
Well, firstly, I'll say that I don't find this as shocking as I did at first, because as I said before, I think that there is something systemic that allows something like this to go on for so long. It's not that it's any one person's fault, but for instance, experts are, quote, experts, who I do not happen to believe have to write about every painting. I don't think it's a crime for an expert to miss a fake. But I think the pressure they're under, because it's so litigious, that experts actually are not, they're not free to say whether something is a fake or isn't a fake, because they can be sued if someone is negotiating a contract. So that creates a situation where, if the experts can't really talk because of threats of lawsuits, and the dealers have their own reasons whether they do or they don't, and the collectors like to be anonymous, which is, I think, a whole part of this, the anonymity angle. For better or worse, when you live anonymously, you also can get burned. Because it's harder to trace the provenance. It's harder for people to, if you don't know who bought the last, painting. I think it's all so ripe. Does the art world in the end care that this happened? It hasn't changed its operating. I'm sure somebody cares, but I don't think that the fundamentals have changed. I think that there are some attorneys who have been trying to push legislation which would be more protective of experts. So that they wouldn't be so open to lawsuits themselves. That could make some difference, but from what I've heard, nothing ever really goes through. There's been legislation even in the New York legislature for years, and nothing came of it, I believe. But there are people who try every now and then. It's sort of like getting rid of the Electoral College. It never happened. And so, forgeries are complicated things. You know, Jim was just talking about the requirement that the insurance company had about what should happen to this supposed Rothko, so that nothing could touch it. But in the court, the moment that the same painting was declared a fake, it was schlepped across the room. No white were needed. It's the same painting, but it's lost all of its value because it's a fake. So some people think that that's kind of ridiculous too. That you know, if you like the painting, you should like it anyway. But it's all about money. So of course, that's where the market comes in. So
Well, I can add something to that as far as what some of the outcome from this trial, and that is it became very apparent that there is no governing body that will authenticate paintings any longer. You know, all the artist estates have now decided they're no longer authenticating paintings. The Warhol Foundation used to authenticate Warhols. The de Kooning Foundation no longer does it. The Joan Mitchell Foundation doesn't do it. Nobody really will take this responsibility. And that is because, as Daria says, that they could be sued because it's their opinion against somebody else's opinion. So everybody has stepped back from this. All the authorities who should be able to rule on these issues are no longer able to. So it struck me is that there should be some overarching institute, maybe it's a nonprofit, who is a research institute that will take these things on, and experts will go on to it and be able to rule this is a real painting, this is not a real painting. But we don't have that right now. There was one thing called IFAR, which did come into play, and you'll hear about IFAR when you see the movie or the film. It's a I guess it's a nonprofit as well, but it's the Institute for Art Research, and they will take on a case-by-case basis a painting or a work of art and try and research the provenance and decide whether it is real or not. But it's not an overarching organization. They only take they pick and choose what they take. But I really feel for an art history point of view, for a research point of view, we need an organization that will authenticate paintings with immunity, you know, blanket legal immunity, so that they can make their decisions. But that was something that made sense.
well, but I absolutely people should not be worried about whether they want to say something as a fake or not. I don't know that there could ever be an institution. And if you look at art and you look at what goes every single day, whether it's a Frans Hals or I don't know that you ever have this body that declares this is authentic, this isn't, because it's changing all the time. I think the important thing is that people should be allowed to express their views without being sued.
Yeah.
None of the foundations,
If there was an organization that will be like they could shield them from litigation.
Yeah.
And if they all join this organization, then they can be shielded, and they might be able to buy insurance on a nonprofit basis that will shield them, so they can speak out and just say it, and then you can take it and have an arbitration or something like that, you know. But there could be something like that. Anyway, that was one of the things that I noticed coming out of this trial, that there was no way that there's no governing body that would say, yes, this is real and this is not real. You can't do that right now. Can you see me? I don't know. I'm gone blank. Or,
I don't see you, Jim.
okay.
One question that I wanted to bring up. Well, Jim, you can continue. Go ahead.
I think I finished my point there. It's fine.
I was going to say that art has gone up. Art's become such a difficult dog. Art has become such a commodity. When I first started in the 70s in the art world, I mean, art was expensive, but it wasn't. You know, you could get what's now for $10,000. You could get $1 million piece. what's now $1 million. So it's changed, and all of this idea of it being a commodity in another way has completely changed. I mean, I sold Bruce Nauman prints for $150 or $125 that are thousands and thousands of dollars today. So it's really interesting to think about how that value really works in the world, and how that's influencing. Where does the art world go from here? Is one of the questions that I have in terms of value. Does it keep skyrocketing?
I think there are two parts to the art world. Over the last 15, 20 years, there's a high part that the art that's now becoming a quote unquote a commodity. And then there is the other part of the art world. And the art world, the part of the art world that deals in these commodities is the very high end. And these have become assets for people to buy. And so therefore these have a different, they're judged differently than the non-asset art. So I just think that people who were in the investment class, they looked and they saw that during the 2008 downturn in the economy, the art market, everything else crashed and was very slow to recover. The stocks went down, the bonds, real estate, money markets, whatever. But the art market took a dip, but then it rebounded very quickly and continued to gain value. So those investors took note of that, and so they started to buy art as a part of their portfolio. So that's how it's happened, I believe.
But Jim, years ago, I mean, Jim Kelly and I have been associated for many years, and years ago, when we talked about art as investment, I still don't think we had any idea that it would go to the heights that it is today.
That's true. But I think because there are more people involved with buying art today than there were when we started out.
Oh, I agree. And Daria, maybe you but when Jim and I started, I used to say that there is a room somewhere that will contain everybody in the art world: critics, collectors, artists, everybody, curators. We didn't need a coliseum; we needed a room, and that's so changed. It's one of the big changes, and I wonder. Used to feel like you almost knew everybody, and now you don't even know anybody in your town, so in your city or town. So just a very big difference.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's related to what Jim was saying, is that as this asset class expanded, there was a time where either you bought art that wasn't expensive, but you bought it because you loved it, or maybe you bought your friend painter's art, but it had absolutely nothing to do with the value of it. And then there's this whole other thing, and just the way the stock market has expanded, so has the art market. It's an asset, it's real estate. So, in that environment, you're going to also have more people who are the go-betweens before. You're going to have more dealers, more critics, more everybody. I mean, I think that's why it's not the little world that it once was. I don't know that that's a particularly bad thing, that there are more people in it. Why they're in it is another issue. But I mean, I think that on every level, I mean, it's another thing. It has nothing to do with the particular story in this film, but like the idea that if you go into a high-end gallery, there are no. I'm not talking about whether the price is posted on the wall. I'm talking about whether a gallery will even give out a price, or whether that price is the same for Joe is for Mary. It's all over it's an unregulated space. And if you want an unregulated space, what goes with it, I think, are scandals and ripoffs. And, I mean, there's nothing new about fakes. Fakes are in every museum. the fact that a gallery could do this for 15 years, that so many people could see not all of the paintings at the same time, because I think that's one of the secrets of why it could go on so long, because nobody except whoever was really involved was seeing all of the abstract expressionist masters. They were seeing one or two. And that's why it was a little bit more believable, this ridiculous Provenance story about this imaginary man who had come to the Hamptons, in the 50s and bought these paintings out of the back doors of the artist studios. It could almost make sense if it was just Pollock, or if it was just one of the other painters. If you had seen them all lined up at the same time, I think a lot of people would have been more suspicious. But I think there were people who were, I've run into some people who were suspicious. Even in the film, there are some comments that there were dealers who were suspicious, but nobody would talk. It's like the Republican Party. Nobody will talk. So.
Well, I have to say that part of this expanding of the art world, the people that are buying these paintings and now becoming players in this art world by purchasing things and becoming collectors. A lot of this has expanded because of the auction houses. Because I think when Laura and I started out many years ago, auction houses, well, prior to our starting out, auction houses were primarily where dealers would go and buy stock for inventory. They would buy works from the auction. They would buy it at a so-called sort of wholesale price, and then we would take it and put it into our gallery, and then we would put it and sell it as a retail. So it was a place where you would buy stock or works for your inventory. But the auction houses become very aggressive, and they really have encroached upon the dealer network and the gallery system to sell now to the end client. They are going around the dealer completely, and they have a lot more financial wherewithal than the normal, mom and pop gallery. They're global, worldwide organizations, and they can go out and they can have shows in Hong Kong and Singapore and in Vienna and Rome and London, whereas galleries in those days couldn't operate in that way. But the auction houses really did push this as an asset. I think is one of the reasons why it's gotten to where it is, such a big business. I think there was something like $66 billion worth of art was sold over the last year, or maybe last year, the 2019 or 2018. And that's worldwide. That's a huge amount of money. And a lot of it was driven because of auctions.
Daria, did you try to talk to Ann Friedman?
I did talk to Ann Friedman, but they were off. Our conversations where she called me up after the trial were pretty much off the record, so I can't really talk about that. But there was a whole period where she couldn't decide, and never really did decide whether she. I certainly offered her. I certainly offered her a chance to be in the film and to speak for herself, but ultimately she. I don't even know that she ever said no. She just never. She just never said yes. So I did speak to her, but I can't really get. I mean, I also saw her at the trial. I bumped into her in the ladies' room one day. It was actually after she had settled, and that's a whole other. I mean, that was an interesting conversation, but again.
Well, for anybody who doesn't know, who just tuned into this for some reason, but Ann Friedman was the dealer that sold all of this work. She didn't make it. She didn't, and it remains a mystery as to what she knew. But she settled this lawsuit, and she has gone back to being a dealer.
Well, she never stopped being a dealer. Actually, as soon as she left Nolde, very shortly after she left or was asked to leave, which was, I think, in 2009, she opened another gallery, which, as far as I know, she still has. No, she bought these paintings from Glafira Rosales, who is the obvious, the obvious con woman and fraudster. She and her boyfriend work this whole thing. The real question, of the trial became, well, what is due diligence for? What should a dealer be doing in terms of due diligence? You just listen to this virtually unknown woman come in and tell you these completely fabricated stories and not really be able to check up on them. So that was really it's always been much more of a question of, I don't think anybody thinks that Anne, I don't think, I mean, this is just I don't think anybody thinks that from day one, Anne Friedman knew that they were fakes. I think that this was a gradual process, and it's anyone's guess at what point she really knew what she knew, believed what she did, and she's never going to tell us. So it's, I mean, she's always contended that she believed really until Glafira Rosales confessed in 2013. Glafira Rosales blew open the whole case because she had been arrested, and then she did a plea deal, and in that plea deal, she totally confessed the whole story, which was she and her boyfriend and the Chinese forger, Patient Shan, that they were behind this whole thing. At that point, no one could say, not even Anne Friedman could say that they were not fakes, because the person who had sold them to her was saying they were fakes. So, but she has always stuck to. Sorry.
Being a dealer, that Anne should have known over that 15-year period that there was something suspicious about these paintings, because in my mind, number one was the fact that she was buying these paintings for a tenth of their value. And for a dealer, if somebody came to me and said, I have a Jackson Pollock and I can sell it to you for, $800,000 and it's worth 25 million. I mean, that is a huge red flag. That is a very suspicious transaction. So I would never go forward with that. And then number two is that over these years, in the Rothko situation, at the end, there were 6 or 7 Rothkos in this collection, and none of them were in the catalog raisonné. I know that maybe 1 or 2 or maybe 3 at the most would sneak by when you're doing a research for the catalog raisonné. Things are buried, they're in a collection that nobody's heard of, and they finally come to light. But to have 7 or so that haven't been even discussed in the world, that is another big red flag. So there were many things that Anne should have been suspicious of. And I think that greed took over and her hubris took over. And the fact that Knoedler had ceased to become viable. It was not viable. It had ceased to become a talked about gallery. It was no longer. It lost its legitimacy. It was never. It just lost its power. And Anne was trying to put that power back to the gallery by having these great paintings for sale. And that's why I think why Anne went down, or the whole thing crashed.
Well, I can only say, I mean, I tried to show all sides of this question in the film, and as her attorney, who sort of ended up speaking for her, said, you can take each of those things, and if you're trying to show how it is possible that what she didn't know, you can make a case for it, as her attorney does. Like, you can say that the reason that the prices were so low. I'm not saying this is true. I'm just presenting the other side of those ideas, is that the reason that it made sense for the prices to be lower than they should be was because they admittedly lacked a true provenance. They had no paperwork, so they had no paper provenance. The provenance really was the story. It was like the origin story. Story that Glafira. So if you believe the story and you believe that this imaginary Mr. X went and bought these, it's not like no artist ever sold a painting out of it, especially, in fact, at the trial, one of the tactics they used was to say that because all these abstract expressionists were these carousing drunks that didn't know what they were doing half the time, So of course they would sell their paintings out the back door of their studio. That was the whole logic that was presented for why it was a believable story. I'm not telling anyone to believe it. I think it was pretty preposterous, but it was the story.
But I do have to say that from a dealer's point of view, I understand the idea that you would discount a price because of a sketchy or dodgy provenance or nothing to back up your story. I understand you would give a discount for that, but not a discount like she was paying.
Right.
I mean, the Mole's painting, they were making 775% profit.
Yeah.
That never happens. Lauren, that never happens in the art world. 700% profit. I can understand maybe 50. They would, if she was selling these paintings for $4 million, and they discounted it down from 8 to 4. That then becomes more understandable. But to have it that huge of a difference, that's a big red flag for me. But I understand your point of view that that lack of provenance could create a discount, but not the big one.
Not so much my point of view. It's that this is very much what was going on at the trial. It's what's gone on any interview where Anne ever talked, where her lawyer took that's the kind of reasoning, which is that yes, this is preposterous, but then I think it's a slippery slope. Once you're involved in a preposterous tale, the next level of that tale, like I mean, to me, once you found out from this is getting a little bit into the weeds, but at a certain point, the original person that they thought might be the go-between the imaginary collector's son and the artists in the Hamptons. This guy Osorio. Well, that story fell apart when one of the buyers went to IFAR, and then they came up with another. Now, at that point, you say to yourself, well, wait a second. How many more stories are we going to?
I know, but we didn't know that story when we were.
Of course, no. Nobody knew everything at the same time.
Except Anne.
I'm really curious about is his name Pei Shin Kwan?
Yes.
Pei Shin Shan, yeah.
He seems to be a great artist in his own right. I mean, at least he's a copyist in what. I mean, we have a clip if you would like to show that. We can show that the piece. I think it's a really interesting little bit of the film, and I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Where his friends talk about him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So let's show that, and then we can talk about him a bit.
First time I met Pei Shin Xian, it was 1982, the year I moved from China, because we were in the same art school. It's called the Art Student League in New York. We share the same interest in Western art. Pei Shin Xian is really more interested in Impressionism. We went to see the museum together. The art environment in New York really opened our eyes, opened our mind. But we also experienced a very difficult time. Nobody can sell your artwork immediately. Pei Shin Qian and I, we had some common friend. He had a building in 23rd Street, so he needed some renovation job. As a student, we couldn't work, but anybody needed to make a living.
So I hired artists to help demolishing and painting.
After that, we work in different fields. Pei Shin spent more time for the street portrait.
And make very little money. In my memory, like $5 for a portrait. Probably his portraits also showing some abstract elements. Not many customers like that, but he did that.
We haven't seen each other more than 20 years. So during that long time, I really didn't know what happened. I was really surprised by the story of Pei Shin involved to this kind of scandal, to make a forgery, to make fake painting and sell for the $80 million, to make the whole market crazy about his fake painting. Especially Expressionism painting, you have to put your spiritual life into the painting. It's not only painting something looks like an apple. So even he can imitate, but I don't think he can fool so many experts, especially gallery. If everybody think this is real painting, patient is a really talented artist. I tell you the truth, I can tell which one is patient, which one is original. So in this case, I believe gallery, they should have much more knowledge than I do. But in the same time, I don't believe patient makes this kind of fake painting to cheat the market. I don't believe that. Not proved that he did that.
I love that. Do we have any sense if he paints in his own style? Do we know anything more about him?
Well, yeah, I've seen his. I mean, actually, there is one of his kind of impressionist paintings on the computer at that time, and there is a book actually of his work that I believe was published at a Shanghai gallery before the whole scandal broke. So he was going. He would probably. I put this together. I don't know the exact years, but I think he was probably going to China every so often while this whole thing was still going on. And he was also painting his own paintings, but it was not possible to, I mean, I don't know of any paintings of his that actually were in New York to see, but I did see them in a book. You can actually get it on, if not Amazon, it's on a rare book site or something. So I asked I asked Hongtu Zhang and also Andy Chen, I was dying to see what one of these portraits looked like, because to me, one of the most curious things was that the one thing we know was this story was never contested, which was that Jose Carlos Bergantinos Diaz, who was the longtime boyfriend of Glafira Rosales, who was the purveyor of all of these fakes that she eventually sold to Anne. Well, he supposedly was walking down the street. Sometimes it was the Village, sometimes it was Times Square, and he spotted Pei Shen-Shan, who was doing street portraits. I was always really curious what it was about his painting of why did he choose him? I mean, he obviously brought him in. Maybe he may have originally, as I think Hongtu Zhang indicates in another segment in the film, he may have basically sort of seduced him into saying that he would sell his real painting. I don't think he took him home and one day said, hey, make a bunch of fakes for me. So I think that relationship probably developed. But one thing I really wanted to know is what is it that he saw in his painting of portraits that would make him think he would be a good forger of abstract expressionists? So I was always asking those two guys. And that's, I think, why one of them finally says that there was something abstract in the portraits. It's not something you see a lot in Times Square. An abstract.
And how carefully was he coached? And you know,
well, later on he was definitely coached. But plus he would go to the Museum of Modern. I mean, in China, you know, he was an artist. He did go to art school. They all did. They all painted Mao. Every single one of them. You know, they were portraitists. And they were to some extent skilled. I don't think it's so outrageous that if he put his mind to it, he would go and study the great masters of abstract expressionism. And maybe he did get a little coaching from, you know, I don't know how much Bergantinos knew. I don't, you know, because he'd been sort of messing around even before with other scams in New York. So who knows?
One point in the movie, you made in the documentary, the point was made that in China, the mimicry or learning to paint somebody else is kind of a tradition, unlike in the United States where we think that's kind of copying. That is something that people are taught. And I thought that was an interesting point. So that maybe he didn't see it as cheating. Certainly, he didn't get paid.
Right. Certainly not that much. Well, certainly at the beginning, I would imagine that at least at the beginning, he could fall for this idea that he's just making copies like they do for people who would like to have something that looked like a Rothko but can't afford it.
Well,
I think at a certain point he found out that these paintings were hanging in the armory. You know, it's like everybody else's story. To a certain extent, you can believe in their total innocence at the beginning. It gets harder and harder as they start to, you know, to see that things are not what they were said.
Well, one thing I found interesting about his painting was the fact that he wasn't asked to copy a particular painting by Rothko or by Motherwell to paint, but just to paint a painting in the style of those artists. So these were newly made up, and he made these ideas. You know, he created these paintings. He wasn't copying a specific painting that's already existing. He made it up, which points to the fact that he's an artist. You know.
Well, I think that Bergantinos, who was the mastermind, was sophisticated enough to know that if they started to try to sell actual forgery replicas, that it would come out. It's the smart guys don't do that. They come up with something a little different.
Yeah. Paintings. Yeah.
Jason, have you had any questions?
We don't have any questions yet. Please ask your questions, though. What happens to the forgeries afterwards? Where do they go?
Well, I know that the Desoles, you know, they paid $8.5 million for that painting, and it's now hanging in their daughter's bedroom in her apartment in New York.
Oh, I was going to say, I thought you were going to say your dorm room.
Yeah, no, she's a married lady now, their daughter, and they have children, but yeah, it's hanging there. They took it home in a taxi and hung it on the daughter's wall. But I have a feeling that, isn't it true, Daria, that Nicus, Nicus, whatever.
Three of the fake.
He had some of those paintings
the ones
in his
that
office.
were owned by Anne Friedman herself. In fact, I think maybe that's how she paid her bill. Anyway, 3 of them, which you see in his office in the film. It's the Pollock with the incorrect signature, spelled incorrectly. It's the fake Motherwell, and it's another fake Rothko, not the one that was in the trial. And all of those are in her lawyer's, position. I don't know if forever. I know that there are some early. I mean, there were collectors that never sued. It was too expensive. If you bought something early on and you weren't spending millions and millions, it was not cost effective to go and, to start getting involved with art attorneys. So there are people who still have their paintings hanging on the wall. I know that there's a couple of the early Diebenkorn ones have been seen in some apartments. And I think that they're just, I think Nolder closed, maybe Hammer. Some of them may have been taken off the market and put, kind of so, but some of them are definitely out there.
Is this true, Daria? I had heard.
Yeah.
I had heard at one point that Anne was kind of thinking about doing a show of this collection. This so-called Free Swiss collection that she was going to maybe put together a show.
You mean before the story? You mean when they were still believing?
Before the story came out.
I didn't hear that exactly, but I wouldn't be surprised. I don't think she would have put all the paintings together in one show. I somehow don't think.
That's very telling. Yeah.
I think.
Is there any lesson, and this is for Laura too, is there any insights we gain about the quest for beauty through this story? I mean, the story is about art as commodity, really. I mean, the paintings were beautiful enough to want to spend $8 million on before they were discovered to be, they're fakes. They have fake signatures on them, really. They're authentic paintings by an artist who was an expert mimic.
Right.
So they were beautiful enough to spend $8 million on prior. There's still the same works. They still have the same, aesthetic value. Is there any insights you have about that afterwards?
I wish I had more. In my life, I connected with work that is more people that I know, artists that I know, provenance, and there's always been a personal connection. It's one of the things I've liked about contemporary art. So I bought very little of something where I didn't really know the artist or know the person, or so I don't know. It's a different world now. I do think the fact that it's not what you say it is makes it really difficult to own, even if it's beautiful. But I do think that's a valid question. Jason.
I would just say, I mean, I'm more into the than the value of it. I mean, I just always have been. But I don't think that this is such an. There's not. What is the difference between, if an old master that is hanging in a museum and is attributed to, Rembrandt or the school of Rembrandt, and then one day a bunch of experts get together and then they have a big, everybody's screaming that it isn't this or it is that. This is not a new thing that goes on where art is reattributed or where, what about the studios of artists where it was absolutely, everybody was making copies. They were making copies directed by the artist. So I don't know whether you can really parse this out in terms of I think if you think a work of art is beautiful, that you should continue to. But that's just, I don't go around buying $8 million paintings, so that's not a.
You're the only documentary who doesn't.
No, I did buy an $8 million painting.
Most of us documentary filmmakers, we're investing heavily in the abstract expressionist catalog. Jim, do you have any thoughts about that?
Where's Jim?
Well, I guess if you looked at that Rothko and you knew that it was actually a what was his name? Pei-Shing. No, it's not a Rothko, it's Pei-Shing. Change your idea about that painting. And you would say, oh, well, that painting really looks like a Rothko. He's trying to mimic Rothko. So it loses its value because of that. But yeah, that's a hard one to answer, Jason. Deciding whether just because it still looks beautiful, but it's not by the artist that it looks like it's by. It's not a Rothko, it's a Pei-Shing. It's not a Rothko. So that does change your perception of this painting. So I would say, I don't know. It's a hard question to answer. It's a hard one to answer.
I mean, there's always a question of when you start to have when an artist is forged and faked and they're all around. You're messing a little with the body of work. You're messing with how it can establish what this particular artist actually did. So I think that there is a problem with forgeries and fakes on that level. As if you're a historian and you're trying to really figure out how somebody, like the famous case with Vermeer and these dreadful, I thought that I don't know how anybody ever fell for Hans van Meegeren because they're terrible Vermeers, but they did. They fell for them for a very, very long time. So that if you really think that that's how Vermeer painted, you are messing with the body of work of what people think Vermeer did. In this case,
why do you think they fell for them? I mean, if it was so clear, why? What do you think what about this human psychology will allow someone to mistake something that is subpar for something that's sublime?
Look at the world. I don't think it's different. I think people are conned all the time. People believe somebody says something is something, and then you've got this, maybe there were people who didn't think that it looked correct, but I mean, that was a crazy case because he was, eventually there was a whole crazy thing that happened because he sold to the Nazis, but then he was accused of being a Nazi sympathizer. And then he said, oh, but it was a fake. I didn't really sell to them. I mean, all of these stories get crazier and crazier because what can one say? You know, you can't really keep track of all the art. You just can't. And it's in museums. So at a certain point, I guess it makes sense if what you're trying to do is really establish, you know, how many paintings and what were they like, particular artists. It matters on that level. But on an individual level, does it matter that you thought you bought something for $8 million and it's worthless, but it still looks good? I don't know.
There are artists today like Damien Hirst who are playing with the idea of authenticity. They have huge studios, and I think there are works that come out that he's never touched. So it's this conceptual idea, and he has a whole studio that executes it, even if it's a painting. So I think there are other ways the art world is playing with that or dealing with that. And even in older times, there are things like older times, 20 or 30 years ago, when Saul LeWitt would design something, and design a wall painting, and it would be put up by other artists, but then it couldn't be really transferred unless you had the certificate. So I think there are a lot of different ways, that people are doing it, but at least they're more honest than they're saying, this is what I'm doing, rather than trying to describe it to a hand that painted it.
Right. Hey, we can wrap up pretty soon. There's a couple questions from the audience, and I'm going to lump them together because they're the kind of questions that you would get answers to in those final frames of the film. You know, the follow up, what happened to these characters. One is what happened to the forger. Was there any contact with him afterwards? And the second one is about Anne, and what happened to her reputation? Is she still able to sell paintings? Is she taken seriously? And also, do people in the art world talk about that?
Well, as far as patient Sean, he fled to when this whole was breaking open. He was interviewed by the FBI, but he fled to Shanghai and was indicted here. If he were to come back, he would be facing indictment, and that's where he has been ever since. And I think he went back to painting. I mean, he does not want to talk. There've been these friends of his, I talked to them about that, and they said he just wants to be left alone. You know, he's not happy about the whole thing. And I think mean, he's probably getting older now. I don't know exactly what he's doing, but he is there. He's still there with his wife. That's where he is. As far as Anne, and Jim can chip in on this, as far as I know, unless something changed very recently, she opened a gallery only a few blocks away from Knoedler, and she did that actually quite a while ago. She did that, I think, after she left in 2009, and it continued. She had it during the trial, after the trial. I went there. How well she does, I don't know. Maybe Jim has. I know she is seen at art fairs. She has not disappeared from, view. What people think is
Yeah, Anne is definitely still in the art world. She apparently opened a gallery in the building where she lives in New York City. She took an apartment above her apartment, so it's in her building where she lives. She is seen in art fairs, and everybody that I know they're like, oh, did you see Anne Freeman here? I can't believe she can hold her head up and walk through this crowd as what she's done. But she continues, and she has some clients with her in tow, when the last time I saw her. So it's very peculiar that she continues to work in this business. And one of her defenses was the fact that she was the biggest victim of all. She was the one she suffered the most from this scandal. But it's obvious that there's some qualifications there to that story. But yeah, she continues to be in the art world, but none of my colleagues would ever deal with her. And if anybody knows anything about this scandal, they're not going to deal with it either. Meaning collectors, they roll their eyes. But I have to hand it to her. She's still trying to make it work, and she's still in the art world. I can't believe it.
Well, maybe that's time for us to end it, Jason. Oh, we can't. Jason, you're muted.
Thank you. I needed that. That's the catchphrase of 2020. Jason, you're muted. I really appreciate this deep conversation. We could talk a lot longer. There's so much happening in the art world right now, and I think after the pandemic, it's going to look much different. So
yeah, nobody knows what's going to happen in the art world. It's really going to change completely. We cannot, we can no longer go to art fairs. They're being canceled even through through the middle of next year. No longer will we have art fairs, and that's a major way that we exchange information between colleagues and look at new art and decide what's trending and what some artists are selling for. There's no way to do any of that. And it's mainly coming down to the internet and these viewing rooms on the internet. And it's so secondhand. You're not able to stand in front of works of art any longer, at least for the next several months or the next year and next half year. We can't really look at art in person. We're making appointments now to go to galleries, but it's not the same as walking into a gallery and looking at art. You have to make an appointment, then you feel a little bit obligated when you make an appointment to go in. You just don't want to browse. You feel somewhat obligated to maybe make a transaction. But yeah, it's changing completely, and we're not sure where this is going to lead.
It's
frankly.
also harder to tell if they've spelled Pollock right.
Yes.
By the way, here in New York, in the Chelsea gallery area, the galleries have just, I think, last weekend, I noticed that they were open, and it wasn't just by appointment. But that's a very recent.
Oh, okay. Well, that's
probably won't last when we have our next flare up. So
yeah. So thank you everyone for participating, and thank you, Jerry, for making this beautiful film. Those of you who have tried to make films before know how hard it is, what commitment it takes, years and years, and oftentimes flirting with financial ruin. So we appreciate you doing that on for our behalf, for the behalf of the audience. And Jim, it's great to almost see you. We saw you for a second. To see you again. We miss you. Sorry, Jim, go ahead.
Oh, I said thank you. I do miss Santa Fe, and I do miss mounting exhibitions. And working with artists. I do miss all that. It's kind of lonely being a private dealer, I have to say. But I'm trying to make a determination what to do next. So stay tuned.
Well, the work that you and Laura have done over the years has made Santa Fe, so much richer, and it has helped so many artists, and we're so grateful for all the work we've done over decades.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
So,
thank you.
Just a reminder: the offers. If you can click on that little offer, and our donate page will pop up, and you can make a small or major donation to CCA to help us moving forward during the pandemic. We have done more than 40 virtual programs since the pandemic started. We're really determined to stay connected with our community and to provide all the inspiration and meaning that we can during this difficult time. We're going to close in memory and honor of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And it's an incredibly sad night. We appreciate the distraction and all grouping together tonight. There is a lot more happening in the living room coming up. Go to ccasantafe.org to check it out. And if you didn't see Driven to Abstraction, please go to the CCA website, click on the link and watch it. It's such a powerful and thought-provoking film. You'll find yourself talking about it and arguing about it with whoever you watch it with. So enjoy that, and more to come soon from the living room. And have a great night.
Good night. Dory, nice to meet you. Bye-bye.
Nice to meet you. Bye. See you around, Jim.
Bye, Jim.